It is Thursday, April 25th, 2024. All right. Hopefully that is better. It is April 25th, 2024. And folks, you're watching the MMA Ecosystem live podcast from beautiful Portland, Oregon in the USA. Glad you're with me today. I'm your host, as usual, Chris Presnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem, covering Asian MMA for my life's passion, and have personally worked for several MMA media sites, worked as a manager, and currently work for Tapology as well. But for the next hour and some change, your attention is all mine. So let's get into some topics. Lots of things been going on the last couple of weeks. Of course, we had UFC 300 a few weeks ago. And since then, we've had a lot of Road to UFC news, a ton of Road to UFC news, and really excited to get into that as well as a few other spicy topics. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like this video, would really appreciate that. Help grow the site, and let's get into it. So first off, we've got Road to UFC, and I'm not going to go into this too deeply because I did put out a reaction video not that long ago. It was probably just minutes after the news was announced it was Monday evening for me. So check that out to get a lot of my reactions, go over all the fights. But since then, a couple thoughts that I've had on the season as a whole. It does seem like we are moving to be a lot more China heavy. And as you look at how different countries kind of flex season to season, year to year, we're now in our third year. How have things changed? Well, we finally have, I would say, our strongest overall group of Indian fighters. However, we did lose Kantaraj Agasa, which I'll get to that in a second. But yeah, okay. Looks like our sound is good. So we lost Kantaraj Agasa. We've still got Angad Bisht. We've got Kiran Singh and Priya Sharma. It's overall a pretty strong squad, but we are losing all the Indonesians. No Indonesians this year. A couple options I think they could have had, but they just chose to pass altogether. I think they could have brought in Gugun Guzman if they wanted to. They could have brought Yuri Kayati, but I think that they are just kind of letting the whole thing slide. So I think that's okay. I would have liked to have seen them find at least one fighter to throw in there, honestly, just to get the Indonesian fans engaged in the season. But they are passing. It is a rebuilding year for Indonesian MMA as a whole. However, I'll get to some more of the complications behind that just in just a second when I cover the Cage Warriors Academy down in San Diego. But yeah, I am a little sad to see that. And at first, I wondered if maybe the UFC could add some Indonesian fighters and non-tournament fights, or at the very least, some non-tournament fights next fall if they're having an event in Indonesia. But honestly, what I've been hearing, at first I had heard that the location of the semifinals was going to be in Shanghai once again at the UFC PI. However, I've been told by one of the better sources, one of the more trustworthy sources that I could ever hope to find, that the semis will actually not be in Shanghai, but they will be in China. So that raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? We saw that Tatiana Suarez said that she had heard that there was going to be a UFC event in August in China. And I think that could happen. We did see UFC go to Singapore for the Road to UFC semis last August. So maybe last week of August, we have a UFC event in China. I had also heard September for this kind of time frame. So August, September is probably what you're looking at for semifinals. And if I'm just putting the pieces together, it looks like we could have a UFC event in China outside of Shanghai. Not really sure why they would do that, since they have been trying to get specifically to Shanghai for the last, couple years, ever since the height of the pandemic. But I guess that opens us up to Beijing probably would be a number one choice. The Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen megapolis down south. They went to Shenzhen back in 2019. So I would think one of those two places would probably be the front runners. There's a lot of other places that they could go, but I would think probably one of those two locations. So that, I think, is your best bet for the Road to UFC semis. And it's possible that they decided not to do them in Indonesia if they are going to do an Indonesia event in September. Possible that they decided not to do that just because there's going to be no Indonesians on the Road to UFC semifinal rounds. So there you have it. Road to UFC for some snubs. So Kantha Rajagasa, not technically subbed, but not fighting against Bargung in the opening round. I checked in on this, and I did hear a reason for it, and I was told not to discuss the reason that he wasn't able to compete, and so I won't. All I can say about that is that his team is hoping that he will be able to make the tournament next year, which I think, barring all of the hurdles that he's facing right now, that I think that if they're cleared, they should just slot him in next year. He'll be a shoo-in. So hopefully he gets to make it next year. Really frustrating and unfortunate that he wasn't able to this year. Bargung, I'm not really sure who his opponent is going to be, because at first the UFC posted a graphic saying that Li Yunfeng was going to fight him. And then they deleted the whole Road to UFC post and reposted it saying Bargung versus TBA. So I'm not sure. So I'm sticking with that. I may try to follow up with Bargung and see if he has an opponent firmly set just yet. But as of now, it doesn't look like it. Another guy that was supposed to be in the Road to UFC tournament was Kim Tae-kyun. I don't know why he's not in the tournament. That's something else I need to follow up on. But he was going to be in. I actually spoke to him directly, and he said that he was in. And so I don't know if there was an injury or if the UFC said, "Hey, we actually want you to do this instead." If it was me, if I was a matchmaker at the UFC, I would have said, "Hey, we actually need you to fight at this UFC event, and we'll just sign you." Out of everyone that was originally part of the Road to UFC roster, I think he's probably the number one guy out of all the tournament fighters. So he should, I think, just sign with the UFC. He's got wins over former UFC fighters. He's fought several times with Brave CF, which is a really strong organization. And I feel like he should just sign with the UFC. Or the very, very least Contender Series, but he should not have to fight 3 times to get into the UFC. Other people, I did also hear at one point that Ko Seok-hyun is going to be in Road to UFC, probably fighting in a welterweight non-tournament fight. That is not happening, and instead he has another fight lined up in the same time frame as Road to UFC. And I think I said it in my reaction video, but I'm still trying to confirm everything with this fight. I may end up being that the promotion announces his fight, but he will be fighting for another promotion. And it honestly I think it will function as a Road to UFC non-tournament fight, because both of these guys should be in the UFC with their next win. And one of the coolest non-tournament prospect versus prospect fights that I could ever imagine. And that's why I'm really wanting to break this fight, because it's really exciting. So be on the lookout for that. So that's Road to UFC. Another interesting thing that was announced over the last week was WLF. WLF is having technically 2 events next month. One on May 11th, and then one they're going head to head with Road to UFC. And very interesting that they're doing that. I'm not really sure why. This is like a collab, like Shudo and WLF event. Let me just show you the fight cards here and can go through them, because there's a lot. I mean, you talk about fighters, who are all the fighters that could have made Road to UFC but didn't, or are a fight away from Road to UFC. A lot of them are on these fight cards. So I'm just on the MMA ecosystem website here that I update multiple times a day. You see all the Road to UFC fights here stacked up on one event. I'm not 100% sure how the fights will split out into the 2 days, but there's that. So going down on the 19th, the Shudo event right here. And there's a star by every single fighter that I'm kind of marking as a prospect to watch. So you see there in the main event, incredible fight between Hwang Yele and Keisuke Sasu. I was surprised that they booked Hwang Yele against Keisuke Sasu, simply because in Hwang's last fight, he fought Reginaldo Vieira, who was a tough Brazil winner, and got submitted. So he's fighting another, honestly, Sasu's pretty well-rounded, but he's also pretty crafty on the ground. And it's almost, you could almost say that this is like a step forward instead of backwards after his first career loss. So I don't know, the wisdom in that could have been, Shuto and WLF just being like, hey, who are our best fighters? And let's put them up against each other, especially if they're at this weight class. So that's a pretty crazy fight. I think Sasu will probably take that fight. Even though I've been a big Hwang Yele hype guy in the past, I think Sasu's experience and his well-roundedness is just going to be a little too much for Hwang Yele, but definitely could be surprised there. Something you'll notice about WLF is they pretty much have a stranglehold on a lot of the Unboil fight talent. A lot of those guys, pretty much all the best Unboil fight guys are with WLF. So you'll see Doug Ashue is on this card. The May 11th card as well has a lot of those guys too. Hailai Wusamo against Haruka Salt Hasagawa. That's an interesting fight, I guess. And then this fight, I'm not a huge fan of this one. Aijaka Akinbieka, who just lost last weekend at that was at Octagon, fighting super prospect Yuji Yannick Efo Viga. Probably just a situation where they're like, hey, we don't have a lot of lightweights, and we need the best one that you have to fight Efo Viga. And, you know, he's got over 40 fights. So there's that, but don't really love that fight. I almost just wish they would have booked Yuji against another Japanese fighter. He's starting to outgrow. He's a lightweight guy. He's starting to, it seems like, outgrow his space a little bit. There's not a lot of like really good Japanese lightweights, even Asian lightweights. You saw Road to UFC not doing a lightweight season this year. I think they could have, but just wanted to stick with that the number four different brackets. So let's go up a week earlier. You've got another WLF card, or sorry, it's on the 10th. This one is actually hosted by WLF. This is in Zhengzhou, and they're going up against Octagon. So they sent fighters to Octagon last weekend. Now this week, they are playing host. So in the main event, surprising fight. You've got Miao Jie, who was kind of one of those WMMA OGs. Definitely like had been around for kind of the early days of like WMMA for in China. And she's taken a couple years off, and she's coming back against a 4-0 Kazakh, Antonina Kotlyarovskaya. Got to take that one slowly. But glad to see her back. She has been competing a lot in grappling. She's a really good grappler, so happy to see her back. And then you've got a handful of Unwo guys. You've got Sulong Rungbo, you've got Ichi Yabu, and Zechio Doji, who is Ija's younger brother. So all those guys, looking forward to that. I think that should be an interesting fight card, having all those Kazakh fighters on there. You know, a lot of times when WLF has played host to these country versus country matches, it seems like the matchmaking is a little bit in favor of the Chinese fighters, but I feel like that could be different against a lot of these Kazakhs. So I'm interested to see this fight. It also seems like it's not like WLF's like absolute cream of the crop. I mean, they've got some good guys from Unwo on here, but it's not their absolute best. And that's partially because they're also going head to head a week later, and they sent some fighters last week as well. So very busy time for WLF. All right. So let's now go to, here's an interesting one. Do you guys see this? Did you see that One Championship has announced 4 fights for an event on September 6th, and it is still April. So that is 5 months away. I guess it's not, I guess, ridiculously far in the future, but I don't know of any other MMA fight cards that have fights booked in September. Maybe even August. I don't know of any fights that have been definitively booked for August. So that is super interesting. I'm going to show you the this graphic here, and you'll see what I mean. Because this really surprised me. If you look at the One Championship poster for 168, what do you notice about this poster? Well, it looks really similar to the lineup for 167 in the beginning of June. You've got Stamp Fairtex, you've got Cade Rutolo, Mikey Musumeci, and Liam Harrison, all on both of these cards. I've sometimes seen a fighter double booked, and I can't remember who it was, but I feel like in the last couple of years there actually was an instance with a UFC fighter too. Or no, actually, you know who is kind of double booked right now is Ihor Potieria, the Ukrainian light heavyweight. He's booked on the May 4th show in Brazil, and then he's also booked on the Saudi Arabia card against Shara Magomedov. So, but I bet you the UFC has a backup in place in case he can't. He's fighting freaking Michel Pereira in Brazil, so that's a really dangerous fight. Could definitely take a lot of damage or even get knocked out against a guy like dangerous guy like Pereira. So, but they've done it 4 times. These fight cards are 3 months apart, so it's not totally out of the question that they would be able to turn around. For grappling matches, I think it's a little more sensible. If you were to think through, like, okay, if you're going to have fighters that are able to turn around and potentially come out unscathed from their matches, I would think, Stamp Fairtex versus Denise Zamboanga. I think that has a lower chance of Stamp like taking a ton of damage from Zamboanga. I could be absolutely wrong. And then 2 grappling matches, unless one of these guys gets heel hooked or something like that. And then Liam Harrison, that one, I don't really know enough about his opponent to know if he's overmatched that guy. I don't really get into a lot of the other sports, but the thing is, though, is that even with those, even if you are expecting like, oh, Stamp's going to walk through Denise, Cade and Mikey Musumeci, like they should be fine. The thing is that freak injuries and accidents happen all the time. You don't even have to call them freak injuries, but just like in a fight, someone could throw one elbow that cuts your head open. You could step on your foot wrong and twist your ankle. You could block a kick and break your finger. It happens all the time, even if it's not this knock 'em out, drag 'em out war. So I would venture to guess that this poster is probably going to change a little bit before 168. The bigger question is, and I barely touched on this, but I have some more thoughts, is like, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to double book 4 fighters? It was like, for a long time, one had a pretty healthy ecosystem of fighters working their way up to a belt, or they would sign a good prospect to fight for a title belt. And then they changed things, and they kind of took 2023 off in terms of MMA, froze out a lot of fighters. And now we're in this era where it's a lot of champ versus champ fights because there simply aren't contenders for these divisions. So the champions are just having to cross over and fight each other because they're locked in, and they're trying to keep those guys as busy as possible. So you have all these champ versus champ fights. And then what do you do if you reach the end of that? Well, then you have to just start double booking people. I feel like this is not a good sign for one, that they're having to double book fighters, because why aren't there other fighters that can take these spots? What about Demetrius Johnson, who's kind of soft retired, but still he still holds the flyweight belt? And they do have a show in November in the US. And so that's just 2 months after this event. And so I think they're trying to think through, like, who are all of our top fighters, and then how can we sort of spread them evenly between these 2 events? There's not enough top fighters to make these events huge events without double booking, without a lot of champ versus champ fights. You see in the picture, you see Jonathan Hegarty with 2 belts. You see Stamp and Shong each with a belt. So there's a lot of that going on, and I'll be real interested to see how this card eventually shakes out, and I'll also be really interested to see who fights on that November show as well. But this is a further concerning sign to me that you have to double book. And the other question, which I've kind of touched on a little bit, but like, why do we feel the need to have these 4 fights at the top of the card? Why are we locking these in 6 months in advance to where we're like putting them on a poster? It's because one championship feels like they have to, like, for whatever reason, it is unacceptable for one to host an event in the same arena as last year. The First Bank Arena, a 6,000 seat arena, or was it 10,000? I want to say it was 6,000. It is unacceptable for some reason to rebook the same arena. So for some reason, they feel like we need to go bigger. And I'll also be interested to see like how many free tickets they're going to give away. You see on the screen here, they've got these corporate packages. So they are pulling out every single stop they can to fill this arena with as many people as possible. Why is that? If there's all these discounts and free tickets, like, why are you trying to do this? And I'm just wondering, is this all about just the image of our organization is growing? We went to this arena, this small arena, we sold it out. So now we're going to try to sell out this bigger arena. Look at us. We're a growing organization. I feel like that's probably a little bit of what's behind it. But yeah, let's keep an eye on this and see how it's selling. I actually am curious to see even, I don't know if we'll be able to see here. Let's just see how many. The thing is, I doubt it sold very many tickets so far. Let's just take a look and see how many tickets it sold. I don't know if this is interesting to you, but this is super interesting to me. Okay. So it looks currently, okay, so this answers a few questions. You can see there are no seats available in the top bowl of the arena. The entire United States Air Force is flying above me right now. Sorry about that. This whole top ring of the arena is blocked off, and this whole third of this side of the arena is also blocked off. That's for like the catwalk and the stage and all of that. That's normal for them, but I'm guessing they will focus on selling these tickets first, and then once those sell out, they will open up the upper bowl of the arena. So very interesting. And you can see like there's a lot of spots. I mean, for 6 months out, it's doing okay. Probably maybe like, I don't know, like 3,000 sold so far. I don't know, or at least given away, taken up. It doesn't necessarily mean that all these are sold, but anyways, won't spend too much time on that. Just thought that was interesting. One, double booking. And then the other thing that I was going to bring up is the Cage Warriors Academy for Indonesia. So this is at a really interesting spot, and it looks almost like the Cage Warriors Academy, at least for the Indonesians, is kind of on its last legs, like they're phasing it out. So was it like beginning of last year or end of 2022, they started the Cage Warriors Academy, which it's still going on, but they decided to invite a lot of fighters from Europe, a couple from even Afghanistan, and then they brought in a ton of Indonesian fighters. And the idea was that, like, we're going to give them scholarships. We're going to help them to train. We're going to book them on Cage Warriors fights, kind of with the hope of developing Indonesian MMA as a whole. And I guess my question is like, what was really the intention here? Was it to give these fighters a more permanent place to train and develop? Or was it just to kind of give them like a little bit of time to train and develop and then go back to your home gyms or wherever you want to go? Because what has happened is they had a handful of quite a few Indonesian fighters. And in the last couple months, they've been sending a lot of those fighters home, and a lot of really good fighters. They've sent home Ephraim Ginting. They've sent home, it looks like last weekend, they sent home Renal Siahan. Another guy, I'm blanking on his name, but a lot of like the fighters that fought and rode UFC in the past trained there, and they're pretty much all being sent home. As far as I can tell, the only fighters from Indonesia that are still there are Jeka Sargi and Cornelius RJ Aritonang, who fought also last weekend at Cage Warriors in Scotland and picked up a rear naked choke win over Thomas Hepburn. So congrats to him. Those two are the only ones still with the Cage Warriors Academy. And it kind of looked like, based on the videos, their excuse for it was that they felt like those fighters were not working hard enough, and so they sent them home. I don't know what the real story behind that is, but if in a way, I am glad that they got sent home, because Cage Warriors Academy, if you want to go somewhere and train and get experience for 6 months, that's fine. But as a long-term home, I don't know if it was the best place for Indonesian fighters. In part, one probably the major problem I had with it was that being a part of this system meant that Graham Boylan, who runs Cage Warriors, he's going to be your manager. You're going to fight for his promotion, Cage Warriors, and you're going to train at his gym. And so you're locked into this like triangle of gym, manager, and promoter, because we saw where those Cage Warriors guys, not only were they got kicked out of the gym, but they also had their fights canceled because the same person running their gym is also their manager and promoter. So that I felt like was a pretty dirty move, to be honest, and pretty frustrating for those guys. And so I think it's honestly for the best that they leave the Cage Warrior system. There's plenty of gyms for them to train, plenty of promotions for them to fight for. And I think that they will be just fine, if not even better off, training outside there. And you got 2 guys still with the Cage Warriors Academy, but yeah, I mean, I wonder like what you were expecting from a training program to develop a country that's on the rise with MMA. I mean, look at the UFC PI Shanghai. They've been around for 5 years now, and now we're getting the point with Road to UFC where it's leaning really China heavy. A lot of these guys are coming from the UFC PI. But it takes, even if you have all the best coaches in the world, all the best resources, all the money, facilities, everything, it's still going to take a long time just to get your feet under you. And, Ronald Siahan, he fought last weekend and then they cut him from the academy. And I just feel like if you're looking to develop Indonesian MMA, if you're really looking to develop strong fighters from the region, there needs to be a level of commitment and loyalty to these fighters to see them through some rough patches in their career, but not give up on them. So I'm not really sure what the goal was with the Cage Warriors Academy. If it was like kind of the Jekasari effect of like, hey, we'll give these guys kind of a short runway, and if any of them can just like blow up real quickly, then we'll take them. But otherwise, we're going to release them to do their own thing. That also seems a little bit dirty to me. And so hopefully that's not what was going on here. Also, like, I mean, I'm not in the room, so I don't know what really went on here. And I know it kind of sounds like I'm assuming the worst from the Cage Warriors guys, but yeah, I think they'll be just fine. But that was a really interesting development to me, that program for the Indonesians seems like it's a kind of sunsetting with just 2 fighters left in the academy. So, okay, those are today's topics there. You've got this weekend, you've got Maheshate Hayishaer fighting against Gabriel Benitez at UFC Vegas 91. You've got Liang fighting against Ivana Petrovic, also on the same card. Really a must-win situation for both fighters. Both are on losing streaks in the UFC. Liang Na, I thought she was going to be cut after her last fight. She's 0-3 in the UFC, and I don't really expect, honestly, anything different from her. I mean, Ivana Petrovic is 0-1 in the UFC, so like, I mean, this is the fighter to give Liang Na, but she is an exciting fighter, that is for sure. She always pushes a hard pace, high offense, low defense, exciting. But yeah, I honestly expect kind of the same result from her this time around as well. And then Maheshate, I think I would lean toward him getting the win in this fight. Gabriel Benitez is a really experienced guy, but for the most part, when he's fought fighters that aren't at kind of the bottom of the pool in the UFC, he hasn't performed all that well. So I think Maheshate should get this fight. He should get it in the bag. All right, let's hit some questions. So probably talking about Jung versus Yan. I think a lot of people came away from this fight feeling like, certainly I've seen a lot of the impression that Weili's striking has lost a step because we're focused on grappling. And I heard someone describe her as like the opposite of a wrestler who falls in love with her hands. Jack Slack said that she's becoming more well-rounded, and most of Yan's success on the feet was due to Weili gassing herself out in 1 and 2. I don't think we should be asking how good Xiaonan is if that fight was called correctly. Should have ended in round 1 and round 2. I don't understand why you defend Yan Xiaonan. Well, yeah. Okay. So I'll hopefully try to hit a lot of these questions all in one go. The reality is that Yan Xiaonan overperformed and Zhang Weili underperformed. And if you look at expectation, I think a lot of the reaction comes from expectation. What did most of us expect? And when I say most of us, I'm not just talking about those of us on this podcast and on this chat. I'm even talking about, like, broadly speaking, as I try to get the pulse on things far outside of my circle, my visible spectrum within the MMA media sphere. It seemed like people were pretty unanimous. Either Zhang was going to take a dominant decision or get a finish midway through the fight. And I was on that side. I thought that Zhang was going to get a finish midway through the fight. Thought that it was going to look a little bit like Carla Esparza versus Yan Xiaonan. Thought that Yan was going to have a good first round if she was able to start off really strong and fast, but that would be her best round and things would kind of collapse from there. And with that in mind, it felt like Yan overperformed and it felt like Zhang underperformed. And I don't think it was just, I don't think it was someone having a good or a bad night necessarily. I think that Yan was better than I expected. And I honestly expected more from Zhang. I'm just being honest there. And I'm trying to, like, look at this fight as, like, unbiased and clearly as I could. So I think, like, when you have a reaction that, like, wow, Yan, I think a lot of that for me comes from my expectations on the fight, because I just didn't expect that from Yan. I also I don't really agree that the fight should have been stopped. I don't see a reason. I just, as I've gone over that fight and thought through it and heard from both sides, like, I don't see a situation where that fight should have been stopped. So what happens is Zhang gets Yan on the mat and she's got her in the choke. The round is winding down and she's got the full choke locked in. Yan isn't tapping. Yan isn't tapping, and basically the round ends and Yan stumbles back to her corner, and people are saying she was out. Just like a knockout could or couldn't be, submissions, chokes as well. It's not like you're in or you're out. There are levels to this. Having done jiu-jitsu myself, like, there are situations where you're like 90% out and you're just, the like ghost of your body is just hanging on, but you're not totally out. Now, usually I tap. I don't usually let things go that far, but I feel like if you can stand up and somehow make it back to your corner, I think you're fine. We see fighters all the time that are badly, badly hurt that do the exact same thing. They're hurt with punches, with strikes, and they stumble back to their corner and there's no foul there. As long as you survive, as long as you can make it back to your corner, I don't have any problem with that. So I feel like it was as close to a finish as you can get without being a finish. So I don't have any problem with that. It was still a really good performance. In some ways, it was a good performance from Zhang, but it did expose a couple holes, which I hesitate to even say exposed, because like these are things that I pointed out in the video. A lot of the things that I said, look for Yan to do this in the fight, she did those things. A lot of things that I said, look for Zhang to do this in the fight, she did those things. And in a lot of ways, the fight went how I thought, but I thought that Zhang's defense would be a little bit tighter in a lot of places, and that she would not allow Yan to get off. Either way, every single champion has better or worse fights for them. Things sometimes I could have been something going on behind the scenes. I think that it could be true that maybe Zhang gassed a little bit, and that's not even so much an indictment on her strength and conditioning as much as just like she had a couple near finishes against Yan. And so, yeah, she really she tried the hardest she could to get Yan out of there, but just couldn't. So I don't see what the problem is with giving Yan her due respect and then saying on to the next one for Zhang. Personally, I don't see why that is such a offensive opinion, because it only elevates Zhang's win to give Yan her respect. She gave her a far tougher fight than Amanda Lemos did, gave her a tougher fight than Carla Esparza did, gave her a tougher fight than Joanna Jędrzejczyk the last time. And in some ways gave her a tougher fight than Rose did the second time. So I don't understand the downplay of Yan's ability in that fight, honestly. And again, I've got no horse in this race. I'm not I wouldn't say I'm not a fan, but I'm not, I don't have an agenda in saying that. I'm just trying to give each fighter their respect. So what's next for Zhang? I'm sure there's probably some questions about that. Personally, what I would like to see happen, well, if the UFC is going to go to China in August, I don't know why they've been reluctant to do this, to just book Zhang in a title fight in China, but so far they have. It could be just a time zone thing. They're going and having this pay-per-view in Manchester that's starting at 11 p.m. local time. So why not just do the same in China? Do a Zhang title fight, do a 10,000 seat arena that you can sell out in a big city like Beijing. Easy. I would love to see Zhang get to go back to China. Have her fight Tatiana Suarez. Let's do that. Otherwise, I still feel like Tatiana Suarez should be rebooked against Amanda Lemos. I really do. I feel like that is the fight to make. If you're going to have Zhang come back at the end of the summer, the timing probably not totally there to rebook Tatiana Suarez, so she's probably just going to get slotted into a title fight. So that's probably what's going to happen there. And I really look forward to that. I think that is also a really amazing title fight, and could really could bring out the best in Zhang, I think. Yeah. So you talked to Ghost about Weili being vulnerable to the jab. We saw that in the fight. He told me that fighters that look to counter certain moves are going to get hit by the move they're looking to counter. He even said Weili specifically looks for the cross counter over the top of the opponent's jab and the right low kick as her opponent steps in. He said it's not perfect. You can't counter perfectly every time your opponent shows you something. I mean, she's still vulnerable to the jab. It doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. It still is something that can cause damage. We're looking to start some fights today, guys. Korean Zombie getting his guys in. Fans don't like it. Dude, there's been a lot of negative blowback to the Koreans this year. I mean, gosh, we've seen how the UFC favors Korean Zombie. And I think up till now, rightly so, but getting Kim Han Sol and Hong Jun Young back in there, I don't understand it, guys. two Korean zombie guys. They gave Choi Sung-gook another chance. They gave him back-to-back chances. Kind of glad that he didn't make it this year. Not because he's not deserving, just because it's time for something different. So they've got Kim Hun-sol, they've got Hong Jun-young, and then they've got who's the other guy? I actually think that he should be in it. Not Song Young-jae, not Seo Yadam, Ki-won Bin. That's the guy. I'm fine with that one. He's a good fighter. He's a powerful guy. Putting him in a non-tournament fight, I don't have a problem with that. But yeah, Korean fans are definitely not happy. There was a couple things, like I talked about Kim Tae-kyun was supposed to be in it. Ko Suk-hyun was supposed to be in it. And even I think Kim Min-woo, they did want that, but it didn't happen for whatever reason. I heard something about that, but I wasn't able to confirm that. So a lot of the top guys they really wanted, I think for whatever reason couldn't. I do know that Red Horse Kim Kyung-pyo applied for Road to UFC, so I don't know why they didn't go with him. He would have been a great choice even for a non-tournament fight. I would have honestly chosen him over Ki-won Bin just because he's only had one chance. Ki-won Bin has had two. So, and Kim Red Horse, he's on like a really good win streak right now with RIZIN. So I was surprised about that. Okay, talking about Weili's post-fight speech. Super nice. Just like a super, okay, you've got a breakdown of that situation. I'm not gonna put all of them up on the screen, but I will read through it. So you're saying people are booing her post-fight speech on the basis of the Chinese government commits human rights abuses. So you think that was part of it? They don't want to visit China and have their families disappear, like they're doing to Wei. Okay, so you're saying that she's advocating for some kind of Chinese superiority. And then saying, even if you don't like the country, you don't like the politics of the government that's in charge of the country. Yeah, no, I totally agree that I am really confused about that. I don't know that it was even a majority of the arena, probably just a few really, really drunk, wacky fans, but saying there's things you can criticize about Chinese government, but you're booing the person who came out here and gave you a great fight. Love it if we could reciprocate that kind of support. Why has it gotten to this point? Also, I think understand that in a lot of ways, what I said, I think there was probably a few really drunk fans that were booing. I think a lot of people probably didn't care or appreciated it. It seemed like a really kind gesture of hospitality and friendship between two countries. I didn't sense a single note of political commentary or overtones to it. And personally, I can vouch that the hospitality and food in China is top notch. And so I will take that invitation anytime. But yeah, I don't know. I literally don't get it. And I don't know what motivated those folks to act that way, but I disagree. And I think anyone that is inviting you over to share a meal and enjoy good food are the best kind of people. So, and if those folks don't want to enjoy that kind of food and see the beautiful landscape, then that's their problem. They're missing out. I pity that. Like Their loss. There's plenty of things that folks around the world find contentious about the American government and would consider human rights abuses or things that are really problematic. And so every country has their issues. I'm not saying they're all exactly equal. Everyone has their leanings, but I'll never say no to someone that wants to invite me over for food. That's all I got to say about that. Coming back up here, it sounds like a stretch that they do an event in Indonesia. Probably the closest to UFC quality is Bilal Hassan. If they want to do an event with Indonesians, but it's too soon, again, just a stretch. I've thought that, but I think that they could still do it. And if you think about a lot of the Singapore events that they have, how many Singaporean fighters are on those cards? I think that the UFC still would love to host an event in Indonesia with really any fighter on the card, any kind of fighter. Asian fighters, great, but like they put on events in Singapore before where they have fighters from all around the world. They go to Singapore, they have who was it? Leon Edwards versus Cowboy Cerrone. They've had Holly Holm versus Betch Correia. They've had Korean Zombie versus Max Holloway. So there's a lot that they could do. You could even put like Song Yadong on top of the card. I know he's not Indonesian, but like, it's a fight that you can put in that time zone where things kind of line up, even with the Chinese market. So, of course, if they're going to China, you might as well just put him on that card too. But I think they do have enough Asian fighters where they could spread them out between the two fight cards. Yeah, I think just anything that you can give the Indonesian fans, even if they're not local fighters, I think will be a home run. So yeah, you could have Jekka on the card. Bilal Hassan, I think it's probably a little bit too early for him, but never say never. I would love to see them just host an event in Indonesia. We can work on building up the Indonesian talent over time, but yeah, we'll see what happens. Very interesting. Kim Tae-kun and Ko Suk-hyun not being in Road UFC is crazy. Yeah, I do think like once you hear about Ko's fight coming up, then I think you'll understand like, okay, this is basically just, you could see it as another Road UFC non-tournament fight. And probably if he wins this fight impressively, he'll either get into the UFC or get into a non-tournament fight in the fall. Can JCK ever co-promote with WLF? That is a really interesting question. I don't feel like they will. It feels like they are always going to be competitors, even though I feel personally like JCK will probably... I feel like JCK is overall the better organization in a lot of ways, but... which I'm trying to figure out how to order one of their t-shirts, but I'm having a heck of a time doing it through WeChat. Anyways, I feel like, and I've talked about this on subsequent podcasts, but a lot of times China, I think, much rather prefers, if they're going to co-promote, to do a China versus country card rather than a China versus China co-promotion. Simply because I think a lot of the nationalism plays into, I don't mean that even negatively, but just the national pride plays into a lot of Chinese matchmaking, both currently and in the past. You're seeing it now with all the co-promotion with other promotions. And it also seemed like there was at least from, I'm gauging this honestly from a lot of you all's comments about a little bit of a lack of excitement from the Zhang versus Yan fight. And I wonder if there is more excitement towards co-promoting internationally than there is domestically. So I don't feel like we'll ever see that. And especially like, I mean, if JCK co-promotes with Alash Pride FC of Kazakhstan and they ultimately lose that, it's kind of just like, hey, you guys were the better promotion tonight. Like, good job. Like, we still really believe in our fighters. Whereas like if you co-promote with WLF and then you lose, then it's like, okay, WLF is the better Chinese promotion. So I don't know. There could be some advantages to that, potentially growing your individual audiences, potentially. But I doubt we see it. James Krause of Betting the House, the Calvin Cater of watching good fights, now knowing there will be bad fights later. It's a little bit of a rough stretch the next couple weeks for sure. Thoughts on Tatiana Suarez saying she would 100% sub Weili because Weili will look to wrestle her. I mean, every fighter does this, right? Like every fighters are super confident, and fighters, especially if you're at the top of the division, you're pining for a title shot. Like every fighter does this, or most fighters do this. This is normal fighter talk, saying I'll 100% knock them out. I'll 100% submit them, going to dominate the fight. I think it's pretty normal. And so I wouldn't personally take too much offense to that. I think that's just fighter talk. I think ultimately these fighters do respect each other, but I think that's just part of being a fighter, is being really confident in your own skills. So Slack did a retrospective on a past DJ versus Kyoji fight when weeks are slow. Is that something you would try if weeks are slow in Asian MMA and UFC? Perhaps, but I just worked through my schedule for the next 2 months. It's hard to like plan your schedule for a long ways into the future with MMA, just because you don't always know what fights are going to get announced. But I just planned out my schedule for the next 2 months, and it's going to be pretty busy. We've got a lot going on in May with Road to UFC, which for that, what my plan is for Road to UFC, and I could end up pulling back on some of this if it's too much, but I've got 3 interviews that I'm working on that I feel pretty confidently I'm going to be able to make happen with fighters of 3 different countries. And then I am going to do a look at each of the men's tournament brackets and basically like seed or like rank each fighter, and then give you like a profile on each. So hopefully just like, and I'm going to have the first one out next week, and then it'll be every week I'll put out, flyweight, then featherweight, then bantamweight. So I already kind of did a little bit of a brief look at the strawweight tournament, so I'm not going to do that one at risk of repeating a lot of things. And then in June, there's an interview I'm hoping to do, potentially 2. There's a couple guys that I've had just like on hold with interviews of just like, yeah, we're just waiting for the right time. But June, hoping to do 2 interviews, and then I'll probably do something on Pooja Tomar to see like how good is she actually, and then we'll go from there. So it's sometimes hard for me to do that if there is like a slow time that I can anticipate, a slow month where there's not a lot of Asian fighters competing. I could see myself doing that. However, like the thing is, I'd be interested to see how he does it. Tape study on YouTube is always so interesting because I've like gotten dinged on the smallest of fight footage. And so part of me just like wants to totally avoid doing any kind of like live tape study where I'm actually showing you the tape on film. So I have to see how other people do it. I know people will do like, they'll have different technology where they're able to go just like frame by frame rather than playing a video. Again, I have to look at that kind of technology, but we'll see. Yeah, that's a fun idea. Have a feeling that WLF and Octagon card can turn pretty embarrassing for WLF. A lot of those matchups look favorable for the Kazakhs. Perhaps they did choose. It's not like they chose like all of their top Kazakh like killers. Although the last week's card, they did have like Damir Tolanov fighting a 5-3 fighter. So that was a little bit embarrassing, but there's a couple guys that the Octagon is sending over that are even making like their pro debut. So they've got these are the records of the fighters: 2-1, 7-2, 4-1, 5-0, 1-1, 4-0, 6-4, 4-0. So I think they chose wisely there. I don't know ultimately who's going to get the upper hand of those, which I honestly think the matchmaking was pretty solid here. I also don't know anything about those Kazakh fighters because I've never watched them before. But we'll see. Yeah, it could get interesting for sure. A couple of them I'm like, yeah, for sure Kazakhstan's going to take that one, but should be interesting. Raynell, yeah, pretty new here, but you mentioned one. Are you familiar with their kickboxing scene? They signed Masaki Nori, who is sensational at kickboxing. Do you cover that? Great question. I don't usually cover kickboxing, and the reason for that is that is not that I don't think that it is interesting or that it's worth being covered. It's just that I have my hands full with MMA, with Asian MMA, and so I usually just try to stay drilled in on that. I think for me, like personally, I would rather be an expert on just a few things than try to keep up with everything that's going on in MMA and across other sports as well. I've even realized recently that covering Asian MMA as a whole, as broadly as I have, is a little bit too much for me. And so I've kind of recently scaled down to basically just be like, okay, the countries that are connected to Road to UFC, other ones, that are in that same region when they pop up. But for the most part, it's China, Indonesia, India, South Korea, Japan. It's usually those countries. And then the other countries, in Southeast Asia, I'll cover when there's something interesting going on. But yeah, I've realized that I have to scale down on some things as well. If I really want to produce quality content for a similar audience time and time again. So if I eventually were able to expand this business a lot bigger, then I would love to have a kickboxing side of things. I did see about that signing. That is, I guess, good for one, that they're signing more and more Japanese kickboxers. So yeah, it really helps them, I think, if they're looking to have more shows in Japan. Are there any exciting prospects in China that I should watch out for? Not named Zhang Weili or Xiong Jingnan. I signed up to Migu, but some of the UFC prospects have like 3 or 4 fights. Yeah. So anyone that is in the Road to UFC tournament, so you can look through that. That's all over those fighters. Most of those fighters, not all, but most of them are with the UFC PI. Actually just sent a bunch of profiles over to a friend yesterday of prospects. So here's another guy that was in negotiation for Road to UFC, was Ali Mulata Bieka, lightweight champion for JCK. I've been talking about him for a while. He is exceptional. First name is Aili. If you type that in, it should come up on Tapology. But he's the JCK lightweight champion. Really solid fighter. Tailaka Nuaraji, really one of the most exciting fighters out of China right now. Fights at welterweight. Huang Yuele, he did just suffer his first career loss, but I think he has a long, bright future ahead. He's fighting on May 19th against Keisuke Sasu in Shudo. Really exceptional fighter. Wang Xiaoshang trains out of the same gym as Zhang Weili. He is the JCK bantamweight champion who just got his next title defense scheduled for May 18th or it may be May 11th. Scheduled for May against a guy named Wu Tze. And I think Wang has a really bright future as well. Other than that, Hu Yong in one championship. He's on a good roll right now, and he's fighting Reese McLaren next for one championship. Keep an eye on him. If I try to get some guys further down the list that you may not have heard of, Agulali, bantamweight, super young guy. He's 19 years old. He has a fight in Indonesia coming up in May. Let me see. Ooh, Zhou Wang, ZE space WANG, fought Zhao Zhikong, who fought with one championship. He fought him last weekend in JCK and looked incredible. Submitted him with a really sweet triangle choke, kind of set it up from the mount, and then did the thing where you flip over and lock in the choke. So Zhou Wang is now on a 4-fight win streak. Really impressive finishes back to back to back. And curious to see what will be next for him. Maybe even like a title fight. I don't know. And then, yeah, if you go back, look at some of the guys I mentioned early in the podcast, mentioned some of the fighters that are fighting for WLF. Umbo Fight, a gym out of Chengdu, has a lot of really good fighters as well. Is double booking disrespectful? Who do you put the blame on if that happens? The fighter who accepted or the promotion who made the contract? Probably, I put it more on the promotion, although it does feel a little bit disrespectful. It feels disrespectful to like Denise Zamboanga and the other fighters who are fighting, the double booked fighters that are fighting at 167. Yeah, it does feel a little bit disrespectful to me because they're basically assuming that their opponent is going to get by unscathed. So it feels a little bit disrespectful for me. If I was Denise Zamboanga or whoever fighting Mikey or Cade, I'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna heel hook these MFers, show them what's up. So I think it is a little bit disrespectful for sure. Will I be doing a live reaction or watch along for Road to UFC Season 3? I think I probably will for at least part of it. The thing is that for Road to UFC, I think I did it for the finals because there were just 3 fights. The thing is for Road to UFC, the first 2 rounds of the tournament is that one, they happen in the middle of the night, like literally like 1 a.m. my time. And so I'm not always my best and brightest self at that time. There's been a time or two, or even as engaged as I was, I like would nod off for a round or 2. So I'm worried about that. Also, typically during these fights, there's a lot that I'm doing, a lot that I'm managing as media. So, posting things on Instagram, recording things, live tweeting, all of that. So it can be a lot if I am trying to also like manage my on-screen presence, give commentary on the fights. So, but last time I did that at the finals was a lot of fun. So I'll probably do it for at least part of it. We'll see about that. But yeah, I definitely want to do more of those where it makes sense. So I'll do it probably for part of it. The worst version of Weili could still beat the best version of Xiaonan. True, but that's the fight business though. Like, that's just how it goes. Still outpointed Xiaonan, but but you have. I just feel like you have to give Xiaonan her credit where it was due. Of like, yeah, she was able to drop Weili on the feet. She was able to get some good strikes and like give her credit, but ultimately Zhang was the better fighter. She was the fighter that was closer to a finish and took a pretty clear decision. So all I'm campaigning for is just give Yan credit where it's due. All it does is improve the optics and improve the value of Weili's win. So hear people saying that they should have a rematch. No, I don't think so. I don't feel like that's warranted at all. If it was a close fight, I would have loved that, but I didn't feel like it was particularly close. I feel like every round was like pretty easy to score. So I don't feel like there was any controversy at all. If there was like, imagine this situation. Imagine if the roles were reversed in round 1 and Yan like almost choked out Weili and there was in that situation. First of all, I think the narrative would be a lot different. I think there would be a lot of people saying like Weili was fine. She was able to make it back to her corner. The fight shouldn't have been stopped. But because you may have some, there just wasn't a moment like that there was no case for a rematch. So I'm with you there. Cage Warriors show clips where they get kicked out of the Indonesians. I know. I guess they didn't see development and just gave up on them. They'll probably try a different region after this, maybe Central Asia. I don't know. I feel like that program needs a little bit of work. If you're like, first of all, part of the reason why they chose Indonesia, not only because it's a really lucrative market in terms of potential prospects and a fan base that's rapidly growing, but they had the partner in Mola Sport. So they're able to broadcast that kind of reality show through Mola Sport. I don't know if they have something like that for Central Asia, but overall, I feel like the program needs more work. Like you can't train fighters for that short of time and expect immediate results when Indonesia does not have a history of success at the international level. It's just too short of a time to expect immediate results. So, but it's a reality show. You know, I feel like the fighters probably knew that every part of this whole experience would be filmed when they got into it. Kind of like Ultimate Fighter, you know, but it still came off as really weird to me for sure. Will Singapore ever have a representative in Road UFC? Not for a while. Now, it's interesting you bring this up because on Monday in the Philippines, probably one of the number one prospects out of Singapore who's fought for Road UFC before, Sim Kai Shong, he is fighting in the main event of a MMA event in the Philippines against an undefeated Filipino guy who I believe is 6-0. So I'll be trying to figure out how to watch that fight. We're really interested to see the results of that and see if Sim Kai Shong can build himself back up. Because if he can get a couple wins under his belt, then I think, yeah, for sure, he could be back in Road to UFC. So other than that, though, like, I'm not really sure. I mean, let me see. I keep tabs on all these things. Singapore, you've got Sim Kai Shong. There's an atomweight woman named Shireen Tan. Not really sure how the correct pronunciation of that, but she has fought. I think she's a 3-0 atomweight, and I think she trains with Sim Kai Shong. So that's really all I can tell you right now. I don't believe there's any other fighters that are anywhere close to that kind of prospect status. Yeah, that's something that may surprise a lot of people, is that Sim Kai Shong does have a win over Lee Chong Ho. I believe that was in Brave, if I'm not mistaken. So that is really interesting. I think a lot of people probably slept on him just because of the violent finish that he suffered at the hands of Peter Daniso in Road to UFC. But I think he's better than he showed in that fight. He performed really well at the UFC Combine Academy this last March. So I think he does have a brighter future than he's shown. And we'll see what the results are this Monday from the Philippines for sure. Will you go to the Shanghai PI and interview Dean Amasinger? Hey, that's actually the plan. I actually just spoke to Dean a couple days ago. He asked me if I was coming out for the Road to UFC quarterfinals next month, and I'm not going to be able to, but the plan is to be able to go out in China for the semifinal round, wherever that is. A lot of my plans kind of depend on all of that, Chinese events, Road to UFC, all of that. But end of August into September, yeah, I'm hoping to get to go there and spend a considerable amount of time at the PI for sure. Just saying that you disagreed that the fight should have been stopped. Yeah, I mean, agree to disagree. And then saying that Jan cheated a lot, saying that she grabbed the fence and stuck her thumb in the glove. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to review that. I don't know that it would have really made a whole lot of difference. Like, there's fouls, and then there's like blatant fouls to try to get out of a position or distract your opponent. Either way, the result's the same. So I don't really feel like it's like I don't know. I don't really feel like it's a big like talking point because the result of the fight is the same. That Weili won a unanimous decision. No, usually talk about Asian MMA, but for the record, guys, like you can ask questions outside of Asian MMA like this for the most part. I mean, I've got moderators standing on by, and I'll skip over any question that I feel like is like inappropriate or bad, but like you can ask any question on here. What's your thought on Naoya Inoue? Do you think he is the GOAT or one of the best Asian boxers currently? He has a boxing match with Luis Perry in the upcoming days. Just saying that fight looks dope. Or Luis Neri. And I feel bad giving that caveat and then being like, I'm not really that well informed on boxing. So I'll pay attention to that result, but I don't know. That's interesting. I feel like I haven't heard that name before, which may show you how out of the loop I am with boxing. I pay attention to like the highest level stuff, and occasionally I'll watch a fight if it's like, one of the biggest ones ever, or at least one of the ones that everyone's talking about. But I'll pay attention to that. I'll pay attention to that result. Yeah, I mean, real. I'm not gonna go into this, but I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna double down on what I say, but that's kind of how I feel about that. Xiaonan getting credit and getting dominated by Weili, but Weili doesn't get credit for her rematch against Rose, where she arguably won. Yeah, and that's what's so hotly debated. That I feel like that's still pretty hotly debated is that fight. But two very different fights. I mean, one had a near finish, multiple near finishes. The other one didn't necessarily have near finishes. It was a much closer fight. So I think two pretty different situations there. No, I honestly don't. I still feel like Weili underperformed, and I think the assumption with that statement is that she has a lot more. Is that like she is a lot better than that? So by saying she underperformed is honestly complimenting her as a fighter, saying that I feel like she has more potential. But no, I don't feel like that's unfair. Saying no longer allowed to make fun of Yan Xiaonan or we get banned. I think that's fair. I mean, I feel like especially any fighter that like steps in the cage, like there's a amount of respect that's earned. And I am still yet to see any reason why Yan should be just like made fun of or disrespected. I mean, she doesn't do much of anything. I don't feel like either way to be like, to either grow a huge fan base or to be disrespected or disliked. So the fight it was a really entertaining fight. I did not expect the fight to honestly be all that entertaining, but it was a fight that for me lived up to the UFC 300 co-main event status. So I feel like just because of that, she deserves a lot of respect. And credit to Weili saying that she told her mods that it's now no longer acceptable to trash talk any of the fighters that lose or they don't like. I really appreciate that. And it just goes to show you why Weili is such a freaking classy fighter. And I feel like she can do no wrong when it comes to like the PR side of things. Like she is a really classy fighter. So credit to her for that. And I really appreciate that. Let's see. gonna wrap things up. I'll probably just take a few more. Feel free for folks watching to read through these comments. Very interesting stuff. Wei saying that Inoue is actually #1 pound for pound boxer. Very interesting. Cool to see that to come from a Japanese fighter. Why didn't Aili Muratbek get a Road UFC 1 match fight? I don't think he or that Japanese guy deserves a shot over him. And Bate Bol getting a 1 match fight after missing weight is crazy as well. Yeah, all of those choices were very interesting. And I do wonder if a lot of those fighters were not their first choices. When I spoke to Aili Muratbek, last month, he said that he was hoping to be in Road to UFC, but that JCK, he was like, we'll see how negotiations with JCK go. So I never followed up with him on that, but obviously either there was some kind of injury, there was something else that came up in the way, or JCK and UFC decided now was not the time. Not really sure on that, but I don't know why he ultimately was passed over. I feel like he should have been a top choice. And I feel like probably a lot of guys that you're seeing there, maybe not the #1 choices, especially some of the older guys that got in there. Bate Bol, I'm like torn on him because I think that he I think about like Xiaolong and how he should be a really good fighter, but for a long time just kind of was like struggling to put a lot of the pieces together. I kind of feel the same way about Bate Bol. I think that he could be a really good fighter, but just hasn't always like has produced a lot of like C or B level performances. And something inside of me still wants to just like see him get to get a shot. And if you're going to lose, if you're going to get knocked out of the, the system, at least let it be by unanimous, or some kind of finish. It just feels like we haven't totally like resolved that with him. So I am for some reason fine with him getting another shot, but the other choices were definitely strange. Saying to keep an eye on Naoya. Very nice. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate your passion. I really do. And whether we agree or disagree, I'm happy that you're here. And I appreciate your love for the fighters. I appreciate your enthusiasm. And I try to be as respectful as I can towards everybody. And so we may disagree on a lot of things, but that's why we're here, right? That's why we love MMA, is because the passion, all the different takes, the different fighters that you can get behind. So I appreciate that. Enjoy the UFC fights this weekend. Pretty like oddly a card that I'm like kind of excited for. Got 2 Asian fighters on the card, Liang, Maheshate. Otherwise, enjoy everything else that's going on, and we'll see you next week, guys. Have a great weekend.